be able to celebrate the official day today with everybody. So just wanted to give a quick shout out, first of all, for Idaho Public Television for all the great work that they've done on showcasing this incredible place, and for all of us to have things. I know that I have several different episodes that they put together that I enjoy seeing again and again, so thank you so much for making this possible. And also too, I want to thank, as we tried to do within the legislature, everybody who has been part of the reason why this has been recognized as such a special place. And we wanted to be able to honor everyone who has worked over the many years. Some of them I understand for nearly 50 years, which is an incredible legacy for people who have been made this whole place an extra special and cared for recreation area for so long. And so I don't want to belabor it, but I just wanted to thank everybody for coming and really just give a shout out to everybody for all you've done to make sure that this is a loved place, and everybody who's worked to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So I am Lynn Gray, the Executive Director of the Sawtooth Interpretive and Historical Association. Senator Stinnett just alluded to other organizations that have been around 50 years, and we were created just a few months after the Sawtooth NRA was formed to provide visitor services and education in the area, and we've been doing that for 50 years. We're very excited to have you here tonight, celebrating the day the Sawtooth NRA was signed into law. And to do that, we've got several people, and I'm going to pass the mic over to Terry Clark, the Vice President of our board, and he will tell you more information.
Hi everyone. As Lynn said, I'm Terry Clark, and it's my pleasure to get to introduce Bruce Reichert to you today. Bruce told me not to make a long speech because he wanted to reserve that right for himself. So Bruce is probably best known to all of us as the host, executive director, and one of the writers for Outdoor Idaho. Under Bruce's direction, Outdoor Idaho has become one of the most honored television programs in the Northwest and has garnered hundreds of regional and national awards, including 24 Emmys and a handful of Edward R. Murrow Awards for Public Affairs Reporting, as well as dozens of first-place awards from the Idaho Press Club and the Idaho State Broadcasters Association, and a handful of New York Film Festival awards. Bruce drew from his personal experiences living in a small town, so he knows the charms as well as the difficulties of rural living. So he built a log cabin in the mountains outside Idaho City, where he still lives, and has served as the editor of Idaho's oldest newspaper, the Idaho World, and president of Idaho City Historical Foundation. The town has a rich gold mining history that jump-started Idaho Territory status as a state. He has tended bar at O'Leary's Saloon, taught 8th grade at the Idaho City School, ran the library, helped start the Idaho City Arts Festival, and the town's community theater. And he did all those things pretty much at the same time, which says a lot about living in rural settings, as we all know. Bruce finally retired a few months ago, April Fool's Day to be exact. He told me the other day that Outdoor Idaho is in good hands as it enters its 40th season this October. And later you'll get to meet some of his talented colleagues that are all sitting in the front row here. Lauren Malink, did I get that right? Bill Manny and Joe Krajik. Bruce will introduce them in more detail, but now we're handing it over to Bruce.
Who wrote that stuff for you? Thanks for being here. You're probably wondering why we're doing this on a Monday, on the 22nd. That's the actual date that Congress approved the Sawtooth National Recreation Act. In the words of the legislation, it was to, quote, preserve the natural, scenic, historic, pastoral, and fish and wildlife values of the area, and to enhance recreation activities on the land within. So thanks to organizing this, thanks mainly to Terry and Lynn. Now in the nearly 40 years that I've worked on Outdoor Idaho as the host and one of the writers of the show, it was this place, the Sawtooth National Recreation Area, the Sawtooths, the White Clouds, the Boulders, the Smokies, where I felt most at home. This notion of finding one's place in the world it's not something they teach in school, and it's unfortunate. I've always felt sorry for those who have never experienced the overwhelming feeling of peace and belonging that comes from being in the place you love. Finding that place may be a very hard thing to do, but for me it's the only thing that's worth doing. Luckily, it's a hell of a lot easier in this state than in most states to find that place. I still remember the first time that I saw the Sawtooths. I was in the 6th grade. My family had just moved from Minot, North Dakota to Idaho. I saw those mountains coming up Highway 21 and I was hooked. I never looked back to North Dakota. The next summer I was one of a handful of people, maybe 15 kids, who took a 5-day, 50-mile hike starting in Grand Jean and doing the loop. It was sponsored by the city of Boise. We must have passed a dozen lakes with names like Elk in Virginia, and Edna, and Vernon, and Ardith, and Spangle, and Ingeborg, and Benedict. And I was hooked. Just like those fish we caught on grasshoppers in the meadows before we go to the lakes. Now, some of those lakes, like Spangle, I've since revisited several times. And the last time for an Outdoor Idaho show called Idaho Headwaters, Spangle Lake is the headwaters of the Boise River. It's about a 16-mile uphill hike out of the Atlanta area. Now back then, the Sawtooths meant one thing to me, and that is freedom. All through high school, my folks would take a couple of us guys from high school and drop us off, and we'd say, okay, pick us up in 5 days at such and such a location, and we'll be there. And we'd be off visiting lakes like Toxaway and Imogene and Ellis and Hell Roaring. To me, the Sawtooths were the best place to spend the summer. And you probably feel the same way. Hell, there are some of you here that actually live year-round here. Now that's pretty gutsy. Now back then, us kids referred to it as the primitive area. It was a name of foreboding and mystery and excitement. And it would be another decade before it became known as the Sawtooth Recreation Area. To me, one of the joys of the Sawtooths and the White Clouds is the things you can learn about yourself. For example, on one of the first backpacking trips, I learned that it's not smart to put heated rocks under your sleeping bag with some dirt over them, because middle of the night you wake up with your sleeping bag smoldering. Now, I got the rocks from the huge fire ring we built. Back then, the Forest Service warned people about us. But how else are you going to know where to build that huge fire? To fry up a dozen or so fish that you're probably only going to eat 3 of. I also learned climbing the mountain at the far end of Toxaway Lake. I have to seriously talk to myself when I get stuck on a ledge, sometimes for 5-10 minutes, and afterwards I seem to be all right. 3 of us kids climbed that mountain and we saw 22 lakes. I looked at my little diary from many years ago the other day. 22 lakes. Now, as an 11-year-old, I was convinced that those hundreds of mountain lakes in the Sawtooths were really the important thing about the Sawtooths. As I got older, I realized it's not the case. It's the major rivers coming out of the Sawtooths, like the headwaters of the Salmon, the South Fork of the Payette, the Boise, the Big Wood. That's what made the Sawtooths really so valuable in the grand scheme of things. And the remarkable fish that swim to the ocean, a journey of more than 800 miles, and then they come back. After spending a few years in the ocean, they come back to spawn and to die. They really are the heroes of the Sawtooth National Recreation Area. That's a migration that really should warm the heart of even the hardest of hearts. Now, over the years, we have done quite a few Outdoor Idaho shows on this part of the state, so many that I got a note last year from somebody up north saying, you do know that there are other mountain ranges in the state, and you better start recognizing that fast, or we're going to stop giving you money. But it's damn hard to not play favorites when Stanley Lake and Redfish Lake were your first loves. But one of the first working trips for Outdoor Idaho was not so auspicious. Jeff Tucker, Idaho Public TV's current general manager, was then a crackerjack videographer, and he and I had driven up here for a shoot, and I remember it involved a horse packer in the White Clouds. But things did not go as planned, and some people at that point thought we should just give up this notion of trying to do a show, an outdoor show with indoor cameras. It just wasn't going to work. Besides, we were doing it on a shoestring as it was. So I think Jeff is here. Jeff, wasn't it 2 trips that we took back to Boise to get to finally do an interview with this horse packer?
Who's counting? I don't know.
That's Jeff. Who's counting, he says. So fast forward maybe 10 years. I had become fascinated with the politics of the special part of the world here, and I came to realize that it was not an accident. It was not an accident that we have what we have. It took political leadership, a willingness to think outside of the box, a willingness to listen to the locals. That train could easily have come off the tracks at any number of points. It could have gone in several directions. It could be today a national park. Some people wanted that, some people still do. They could have done nothing, in which case we would have a meadow full of a hodgepodge of buildings and hotels and subdivisions scattered throughout the meadows, and a degraded mountain known as Castle Peak. And what may come as a surprise to a couple of you, I think most of you know this, it wasn't really the Sawtooths that led to the creation of the SNRA. It was one mountain in another range called the White Clouds, and it involved a mountain, Castle Peak, that the governor at that time, Don Samuelson, said, quote, "It's nothing but sagebrush on one side and scraggly trees on the other." But more on that when we show you the video piece. Back then, and this is something you probably all know, the National Park Service and the Forest Service were rivals, and they were each trying to convince the world that they could do a better job of protecting this landscape. Now, one of the Forest Service rangers, Tom Kovalicki, told us in an interview that they told him his job was to go around and tell the locals that if you have a national park, you're not going to be able to hunt. And he said after he told them that, it was a piece of cake. But this notion of a national recreation area was kind of a new concept back then. There really wasn't a template. It was more a solution to a political problem. And I think one of the best explanations I've heard about the difference between a national recreation area and a national park is that people get to be part of the ecosystem in a national recreation area. You can cut firewood, graze cows, fish, and hunt. Those activities are all allowed here in the National Recreation Area. So I think it fit this part of Idaho better than a national park. Not too much of a burden on those who live here and still protecting the resource. And I admit there are people who have problems thinking that the Forest Service is protecting this area, but that's another story. We did some of the last interviews with people who played a major role in the creation of the NRA, people like photographer Ernie Day, Congressman Orville Hanson, I remember doing the interview with Orville at his house down here in Lower Stanley. And I don't know if you remember him, but he had the most amazing eyebrows. And I would ask him a question, he'd start talking, and inevitably my eyes would go up to those eyebrows. Luckily we had it on tape so I could go back and see what the hell he said. And I told his wife at the time, I said, God, he's got eyebrows. And she said, don't go there. And I think we got one of the last interviews with C. Sanders. One of the last long interviews with C. Sanders. So the last two Outdoor Idaho shows that we produced on the SNRA were called the Sawtooth Celebration, and then about 10 years later, Sawtooths on My Mind. Now, in our show, A Sawtooth Celebration, we spent some time looking at the fascinating history of the creation of the SNRA, and so that's something I would like to show you. And then after that, Bill Manny and Lauren Malink and Jay will look at some of the video from the last show we did on the Sawtooth National Recreation Area called Sawtooths on My Mind. And Jay can talk about what it's like to shoot in the wilderness area. It's not easy. It has its own set of difficulties, but Jay always knew how to bring back the good video. So hopefully you'll come away from this evening with a deeper appreciation of the remarkable corner of the planet that we can call home, and why it doesn't look like Jackson Hole. Of course, it still faces many challenges, like mansions, towers, overcrowding, weeds, wildfires. So from me to them, a heartfelt thank you to those who fight for the SNRA and its true mission to preserve the natural, scenic, historic, pastoral, fish and wildlife values of the area, and to enhance recreation activities on the land within. So with that, let's look at the first video clip. This should be a Sawtooth celebration.
The Sawtooths may be Central Idaho's most recognizable mountain range, but it is by no means the only one in this national recreation area. At one end of the vast valley lies the Boulder Mountains, and to the north of them, the White Clouds, a mountain range that in almost any other state would easily get top billing. And it is here, at the base of Castle Peak, where the story of the Sawtooth National Recreation Area begins to take shape. ASARCO, the American Smelting and Refining Company, was no stranger to open-pit mining. And in the 1960s, the company sought to develop another open-pit mine, this one at the base of the largest mountain in the White Clouds, Castle Peak. Their geologists were looking for a strategic metal, molybdenum, that could potentially be worth tens of millions of dollars to the company and its shareholders. Molybdenum is used to harden steel in such things as aircraft engines and nuclear power plants. Advocates said the proposed open-pit mine would supply Custer County with 350 high-paying jobs for many years to come. Besides, they said, hardly anyone ever visited the White Clouds. But in 1969, a young man with a camera did just that, bringing back extensive evidence of what was actually going on in the heart of the White Clouds. It's been more than 40 years, but we asked College of Idaho archivist Jan Bowles to reminisce about what he saw on that backpacking trip.
The first thing we encountered was the ASARCO camp at Baker Lake. Then we worked on out toward their claim, and all of a sudden here was a big clearing for the helicopters. A lot of timber had been cut down. Red spray paint blazes on trees showing where roads were intended. A lot of people in there, a lot of machinery, a lot of noise, a lot of dynamite. There were enormous dynamite blasts going off, echoing down the canyon that were really kind of spooky. There were hoses around from water systems. And just beyond that was the drill rig at Little Boulder Chain Lake number 1, which showed the effluent being dumped right in the water. It wasn't clear anymore. It was that milky turquoise color in the water. There was no doubt in my mind that it would just take an entire drainage and wreck it as far as hunting, fishing, recreation, backpacking, potentially heartbreaking. I did a lot of head shaking.
It was the photos of Jan Bowles and another Idaho photographer, Ernie Day, that brought the grandeur of Castle Peak to Idahoans across the state.
Ernie Day had done aerial photos of Castle Peak early on, actually before we made our trip. His pictures were widely distributed because they were wonderful pictures, and that was very influential. Here was a Christian Science Monitor and a full page devoted to the white cloud. That showed that the story extended well beyond Custer County, well beyond Idaho. Being part of that was a gratifying feeling.
By 1970, the conflict in the White Clouds had become the hottest issue in the Idaho governor's race. The state's governor at the time, Don Samuelson, argued that mining was what made Idaho great. And besides, he said, the open pit mine would eventually be converted into a new lake. But to his Democratic challenger, Cecil Andrus, the White Clouds represented some of the best that Idaho had to offer.
What they wanted to do was a crime. And I said, no, we're not going to let that happen. And we didn't. That issue alone probably accounted for the margin of victory that I had in 1970, which was about 10 or 11,000 votes.
One of the media outlets was quoted as saying, this really propelled him to be the first governor that was elected on an environmental platform. I didn't expect to find that here in Idaho.
Erica Jensen wrote her university master's thesis on this very controversy.
It was kind of just the perfect storm of the way things came together in Idaho, with it being an election year, the way the tensions had been there and kind of been festering for, really decades. It was an interesting story to find that really, here in Idaho, we were at the heart of the environmental movement. What really did a lot to propel Idaho into the national spotlight was this 1970 article in Life magazine. There were people who were writing from New York, from across the country, who all of a sudden felt invested in this place. And you realize it brought this issue front and center to the nation, that we had to decide what was the best use for these landscapes.
Caught in the middle of all this was the U.S. Forest Service. The Mining Act of 1872 gave ASARCO the upper hand, but the Forest Service's emphasis on multiple use rendered the agency rather ineffectual in stopping the defacement of what virtually everyone agreed was a special part of the state. As often happens, it takes a crisis to motivate policymakers. And plowing a road into the heart of the White Clouds to create an open pit mine was just the crisis to motivate Idaho's congressional delegation. Besides, Idahoans were not oblivious to the growing environmental awareness sweeping the nation. Boyd Norton was one of those who led the charge against ASARCO's plans.
I took some photographs of that Henderson mine up near Leadville, Colorado. It was a pile of sludge and muck, heavy metals, and all kinds of carcinogens. So we were able to run photographs and say, do you want this in the White Clouds? There are a lot of people that live in Idaho who may not be hardcore conservationists, but they really appreciate what they have here. And when you have something that's so threatening and damaging as an open pit mine, I think that makes people sit up and take notice.
Norton and his Greater Sawtooth Preservation Council lobbied for a national park, one that would encompass parts of the Sawtooths and the White Clouds.
A national park is something kind of sacred in the minds of many people. So it really was important, we felt, to push for a national park. Of course, later we got talked out of it.
A national park there would preserve unspoiled for future generations the natural beauty and wildlife of this lofty wilderness. Perhaps we owe this much to our grandchildren.
In fact, even Senator Frank Church, who in the 1950s had pushed to make the Sawtooths a national park, ultimately had a change of heart.
I met with Frank Church quite a few times, and we decided if you make this beautiful valley a park, it'll attract so many people that they'll tromp over one another. It can't stand that much pressure. Also, you couldn't allow hunting and fishing, which was a big thing here. One of the few times we differed with some of our other conservation friends, we said, NRA is the way to go. Was that right? Was that wrong? I don't know, but that's the way it went.
Former Idaho Congressman Orville Hanson remembers the battle on Capitol Hill to establish the National Recreation Area. In fact, it was his bill on the House side that ultimately carried the day. But Hanson first had to convince the committee chairman, a friend of mining interests, to schedule a hearing. And things were not going well. It took the efforts of Idaho's other congressman at the time, James McClure, to help broker a deal.
He joined my bill. He joined as a co-sponsor of my bill, but he finally did that and told the chairman we'd like to have hearings and move this forward. That was what did it.
Still, many in the emerging environmental movement wanted a national park and were looking for ways to scuttle the bill.
Had the environmental movement been organized as it later was, they could have flooded the Congress with telegrams and they could have killed that bill or sent it back to committee. That would be the end of it. Had we not passed that bill at that time, you would be looking wall-to-wall development in this valley. I think maybe one can say the good Lord was with us on this one, and we have preserved and will for all time one of the greatest scenic treasures on the earth.
Someone mentioned that I have retired April 1st. It seems strange to be the same age as old people. But I think it was time. Besides, the show is in good hands, and you're going to meet some of the people why I say that. Bill Manny, Lauren Malink, Jay Krajek, they have all won Emmys, if that means anything, in the last year. Lauren is the writer-producer now of Outdoor Idaho, and I don't think I'm telling stories out of what's the word, out of hand, but and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think Lauren is going to be the new host of Outdoor Idaho, and I'm all for it. Is that really true? Jeff, is that really true? Anyway, they're not saying. Bill Manny comes to us from the print world. He used to be really big, high up in the Statesman. You probably remember that newspaper. That's supposed to be a joke. But you team Bill up. He's a quick study. You team Bill up with a really good videographer, and he produces Emmy-winning programs. He's now the executive producer of all of Idaho Public Television, and particularly a new series called Idaho Experience. Maybe some of you have seen that one. And as I mentioned, both Bill and Lauren worked on the show Sawtooths on My Mind with me. Now, Jay Krajek is one who shot and edited Sawtooths on My Mind. He's the one who brings back those amazing images, sometimes under less than ideal conditions. And he has a partner. We know him as the Mule. I think that's what his wife called him, so we figure he's used to it. He told us he's used to it. He's over there, and I think Jay will say more about him. Mule, you want to bray or do something? There he is. One of the cool things about Terry Lee is that he can keep up with Jay. He loves to climb mountains. He can carry packs on his back. He never complains. He doesn't eat hay. He's fun to be with on a long trip, and there are a lot of long trips in this state. If anyone's gone from north to south, you know that. So he's the perfect volunteer. He retired from Micron as a chief engineer there, and we are delighted to have him. But back to Jay. Jay has climbed all of Idaho's 12 peaks. I think there's 9 of them. I think he was a mountain goat in his past life. He's kept himself in great shape, goes to the gym. He can carry 50 pounds of gear straight up a cliff, and we love him for that. So I've explained the 3 of them. I think, Bill, you're going to be first up, or is it Lauren? Okay. All right. Here you go.
Bruce. Jay also is retiring at the end of this year, and it's worth noting that not only has he climbed all the 9 12,000 footers, he's been every single place in this state. He's been in every obscure creek, every obscure campground, every road. If you want to know anything about Outdoor Idaho, you ask Jay. Today we climbed, as a warm-up for this event, we climbed McGowan Peak. And he was so free because he didn't have a tripod and he didn't have a camera. I had trouble keeping up with him. He said, "This is so much fun! I'm not having to carry any weight." He's hurting now, though. He's tired. We're both tired. So in 2019, we started work on Sawtooths on My Mind. And we were up here 10 or 12 times at least between July and January. And every time we came to town, every time we had dinner at Papa Bruno's or at the bakery, people would find out what we're doing and they say, "We love the Sawtooths. We love the Sawtooths." Everybody we talked to said that. We hiked into Alpine Lake and we were coming back. And as we were hiking out, there was this large group kind of sitting alongside the trail. And we started talking to them. And they were from Boston and Santa Clara and South Carolina, and they all come to the Sawtooths because their father had died, and his last wish was to be buried in the place he loved, have his ashes sprinkled in the place he loved. So they were taking his ashes to Kramer Pass. So in my head, I'm thinking the Sawtooths, a love story. And we were in town one day and we saw signs down along the main drag pointing up the hill, said wedding. And so we drove up the hill to the chapel and we invited ourselves to the wedding. And it was Tyler Ketchum and his wife. You know, he's the main guy behind Tyler and the Train Robbers, and they're a big rock and roll band, country western band. They let us come to the wedding. I won't say anything more because that's the clip I'm going to share with you, is the love story that we encountered in the Sawtooths. And I'll say one more thing. When I left, I worked for a long time for newspapers in this country, and everybody loves to hate their newspaper. And everybody loves to give you a hard time when they find out that you're a newspaper reporter or an editor. So you kind of go around hunkered over, when you introduce yourself, kind of waiting for people to give you a hard time. But when you introduce yourself from Outdoor Idaho, people love you. People love you. They want to hug you. It's their favorite show. Bruce Reichert is their hero. They want to know about Bruce. So anyway, I was surrounded by people who loved the Sawtooths. I was surrounded by people who loved Outdoor Idaho. Working on this show, I really felt the love. So anyway, we're going to roll, I think, now.
These mountains surely grab hold of Idahoans, but they also lure people from, well, everywhere.
We are from Boston, Massachusetts. Same.
Together from Boston.
3 of us are from LA.
South Carolina.
From Northern California, San Francisco. Hilton Head, South Carolina.
We're here because our dad and grandpa and great-grandpa, Al Wood, final wishes were that we gather together to spread his ashes on Kramer Pass. I think he just wanted us to be in the place that he loved more than anything.
Our last trip together was in 2001 in August, and he was 75 at the time. And then he announced, as my sister explained, that he wanted his ashes up on Kramer Pass. And we did groan.
Really? We were like, "Whoa." But I get it. I got his plan.
Whatever you want.
I was on a hike on Friday, and I was like, you did right.
Okay, to Grandpa, guys.
Grandpa.
Coming back here after 20 years does rekindle a love of this area, and I could see coming back here again.
He just loved this area more than anything. He wanted us to laugh about all his foibles and enjoy life together.
Love. It's a word that people often use to describe this landscape. And for Tyler Ketchum and Jennifer Paisano, that word pretty much sums it up.
The first time we ever talked about getting married was sitting probably at Redfish Lake on the beach, and decided if we ever get married, it'll have to be here.
Well, here we are in our favorite place. All your beauty and flowing lace, happy tears running down your face. Look at you. Just look at you.
We bonded over how much we love this place.
Yeah.
I grew up coming up here with my family ever since I was a little girl, and I just love it up here so much. It felt like a special place to me forever, and then it became a really special place for Tyler.
People from this valley, they encouraged us to be who we are, and so we always come back, and it's a beautiful place and beautiful people.
Further than these mountains I can see.
I would say that
The future and all the things to be.
I hope anyone who comes to the Sawtooths remembers that the thing that makes them special is that they are the way they are now, and to treat them kindly and not abuse them, because we are so lucky to have this.
So I was introduced to Outdoor Idaho through the Sawtooths. One of my very first trips was up to Hanson Lakes on a backpacking trip with the Outdoor Idaho crew. And I decided to pack 3 hardback books and I think 4 cans of tuna. So I wasn't an experienced backpacker at that time. Yeah, Jay would say I still don't pack that well, but I've improved. I moved to Idaho 3 years ago, and when I first got here, everyone said you have to go to Stanley and you have to go to the Sawtooths. And so I feel really lucky to be required to be here for a part of my job. That's really a special thing. So the piece I'm going to play is about the Central Idaho Dark Sky Reserve, and I think Carol Cole is here, and she's featured in the piece. And I wasn't actually there for it. I started the job, and I got handed all these interviews and video. And it was really fantastic to see how much awe people have for this area. And when you watch it, you'll see there's kind of a childlike feeling. They're just so inspired by what they're seeing. And so you can go ahead and play.
As the sun sets over the Sawtooths, the light doesn't just dim, it disappears.
This is amazing!
And a different kind of nocturnal animal emerges.
Right now you can see with the naked eye very well Jupiter and Saturn over there, about distance of
the amateur astronomers.
Go ahead and take a look.
Caught in the lens of an infrared camera and gazing upward.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Looking at the night sky, you can actually feel that you're a part of the universe. Whenever I look at the stars, I feel, wow, what an incredible thing to be a part of this huge galaxy. Yeah, we're small, but I just feel in awe.
In 2017, 1,400 square miles of land in and around the Sawtooth Mountains was designated as the Central Idaho Dark Sky Reserve, possessing exceptional and protected night skies, the first of its kind in the United States.
You know, having a starry night sky is an essential element of true wilderness, right? It's unpolluted. So we need to figure out a way to preserve this as an amenity both for the residents of Stanley, who enjoy the ambiance of living in a beautiful place like this, and for visitors. And there are several ways to do that. One is to reduce it by eliminating unnecessary lights. And another one is to shield the existing lights, which means putting some sort of cover around them so that the light projects downward. The third element is to use the proper color of light. In other words, an amber or yellowish colored light is much better for the environment, for the ecosystem.
What makes a sawtooth so spectacular to photograph is that everything is different about them. The ruggedness from every different angle, it makes it so challenging. And I can see the next 10 years of shooting the night and having a different picture every night. And that's what's so fabulous about it.
I think it's a natural resource just as much as anything else is with forests and water. You know, being able to get to a dark sky and be able to look at the sky and the stars and see the Milky Way with the naked eye. There's something natural about that I feel like humans need it.
And with an increasingly artificially lit world where we spend more time staring at screens than savoring sunsets, a little darkness might be exactly what we need.
Being able to look up and wonder, the sense of wonder is so important. I think it's important for all of us, but we lose it over time. I think we get so much involved in our stuff. But it puts things in perspective, for me anyway. And I feel humbled by it, which is good.
Get-togethers called star parties are common in the reserve. Folks carrying telescopes, laptops, cameras, and lawn chairs gather to share in the ethereal beauty.
And my favorite thing to look at is M13. So it's the Herculean cluster, and it's a star cluster, and it's on the right side of the body. So that's a deep space object. Wow. Yeah. When I found that by myself, I cried. I was like, I finally did it.
There you go. Along with stargazing, there's another reason to protect our night skies from the glare of streetlights and flashing signs. Wildlife. Birds and mammals also face threats from urban light encroaching into previously uninhabited areas, forcing them to change their behaviors and way of life.
We didn't evolve in a world that was lit up at night. We evolved in a world that had daylight, and then when night came it was dark. And for animals and birds and humans as well, to try and reset some of those evolutionary aspects, it's a pretty quick timeline ecologically.
And for the humans who seek out darkness with an urgency that could be described as a calling, a return to the days of old and the nights of ebony in the Central Idaho Dark Sky Reserve will, at least for now, slow the evolution of artificial light.
This isn't politics. This is us, you know. This is where we came from, so. And it's so beautiful here that we just have to preserve it all. And that's just part above us here.
The reluctant Jay.
There are two mics up here. Do I need more? Okay, so let's see. Where do I start? I didn't write anything down. They did. I cheated. I came up here here in 1981 to work as a SCA volunteer, as a photographer, to help photograph, can't remember there, the evening program, slideshow. I don't know whatever happened with slideshow. Does it still exist?
Yeah.
Okay. So then I came back in 1982 to do the exact same thing, because I was going to get a degree in still photography. And this was long before I ever shot any video. First year I was here, it was kind of like deer in the headlights, and it was just an amazing place, and got to go hiking and see the beauty of the Sawtooths for the first time ever. I grew up in Chicago, so this was kind of a different environment than Illinois. The second year, I remember there was this thing called the tricycle races. And I don't know if anybody was here for the tricycle races. It was like a summer event to get drunk and ride a tricycle. If you didn't make it, you had to drink more. So then fast forward, how many, 40 years, 38 years, we did the Sawtooth celebration, and we covered the Winterfest in Stanley, and drove up to about, right just outside of, I think we got to Idaho City, or maybe a little bit farther, and there had been an avalanche on Highway 21. And we had to get there the next morning to shoot the Winterfest. So I had to drive all the way back around, through Ketchum, got into Stanley about midnight that night, and then covered Winterfest the next morning. So then the next year we covered Winterfest. Or no, for the Sawtooth celebration we covered Winterfest, because we had to cover Winterfest. So it was twice. So, and I've been bouncing back and forth trying to tell you what happened in this shoot. But you know, things happen, and there are certain wardrobe malfunctions. And so there was lots of fun and games and fun, you know, the outhouse races and the infamous snowshoe drag race and the bike race and everything else. So I guess we'll just show you first, and then I can give you kind of the inside scoop on what really happened. Okay. I'll sit over here.
But for those who make this frozen town their home, that allure can dim as winter drags on. Cabin fever can strike. And when that happens, it's time to get out and do something.
This is our 11th year of hosting Winterfest. It started just as kind of a lighthearted party festival in the kind of the slowest time of the year for Stanley. But it's grown each year, and now it's become a premier event for the Stanley community. It just has become a family-friendly event and a good opportunity to come up to see Stanley and the Sawtooths in the middle of winter. If you've never heard of an outhouse race, it's basically people build some sort of porta potty and put it on skis. There's a rider and two pushers, and they race them down our main street, and it can get a little heated because the space at the end of the race gets a little narrow. I think our slogan is keep cabin fever at bay or keep it away, and so it's just kind of a good Fortunately, no one's gotten hurt, but everyone takes a little time. It's just super fun and casual. All the events, they can get competitive.
Lightheartedness and good old-fashioned fun are in the genetic makeup of a place like this.
So, should I talk about Terry now?
Yeah, say something about
Terry.
Where you guys have been.
I think Terry hates me because we always have to keep up with the horse packers to try to get video of them. And I think we were going, where was it, in Hellroaring Lake? You clocked us at 4 miles an hour. Whoa. I was carrying the tripod and I was carrying the camera. Yeah. I don't know what it was. And it was, so, yeah, I think he hates working with me sometimes. I just look at him and he's just looking at me like, what are you doing?
So I think this is where we all go up and get bombarded with questions.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, you can start, Jay. Since you're so comfortable up there.
Yeah, questions?
What's your favorite place in the Sawtooth?
I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
Just between us.
So I worked out of Grand Jean in '96. That was my last stint with the Forest Service. And they kind of kindly asked me to maybe go up Goat Creek drainage and check it out. Has anybody been up Goat Creek drainage? And you know what that's like. Yeah. It took me 2 days to get up there. It was miserable, but there are some really beautiful lakes up there. Yeah. I think Alice Lake is one of the prettiest. Yeah, there are a lot.
Anybody have any comments, questions? It's very, very seldom. I don't think it's ever happened before that the four of us have been together in front of anybody. So who knows what we're going to say? Yes.
How do you deal with power in the backcountry? Have you ever just run out of battery and had to?
Get as many people as you can to go on a trip and give them each a battery.
And give 6 to the mule.
Yes, yes. We have a smaller camera now that takes smaller batteries.
Keep them in your sleeping bag too. Keep them warm, don't you? Leave them in your sleeping bag?
Well, only if it's cold, but they last pretty well.
Jay carries a camera, he carries the microphones, he carries the batteries. I mean, he'll parcel some of that, but he's got a reflector that'll get out if he needs to light the scene. And then there's a tripod that Jay or a volunteer carries. And so, I mean, this is not an easy. It's not an easy thing. And it's not an easy thing when you're hiking on, the Fish Oak Trail, let alone, climbing a peak. So it really is extraordinary to see guys like this at work. It really is amazing.
So what?
Okay. What is the worst photographing outdoor Idaho experience you've ever had?
Do you want us to leave the room?
I think it was following you.
Do you remember what the temperature was that day when we followed you around?
18 degrees.
18 degrees. We did a ski shoot in 6 degrees. Those were my worst days. Yeah, because the fingers don't work very well and the camera's metal and it gets really cold and the batteries don't last as long.
So we were climbing Old Hindman for a show about the pioneers, and there were 6 of us, I think 6 of us in the big basin ready to climb the next day, and we almost all the way in, Jay realized that he forgot the little memory cards that go in the camera.
Because I was talking to Bill about how important the memory cards were. And all of a sudden I got, within about 1,000 yards from camp, and I realized, uh-oh, that didn't work.
So the lesson, the moral of the story though is it takes ingenuity and creativity, because he was able to get a cell signal. He called a locksmith, had the locksmith drive up to the Hyman Creek trailhead, unlock the car so that Matt Erbelding, who was then a legislator and also a guide who was coming in late, could find the smart cards. And so at midnight that night, we finally heard Matt show up with the smart cards and saved the day.
So one of the things that I've been intrigued about, Jay has been very reluctant to use cell phones.
Look who's talking.
Yeah, well,
Bruce Leverage.
So he believes in the big cameras and the heavy tripods. But lately, given the quality of these cell phones, some of that video has actually worked its way into an Outdoor Idaho show, which I think is surprising knowing Jay, but it's the wave of the future. Jay may have some comments about that.
We did the 12-hour show, and we did Diamond Peak, and then I was in eastern Idaho for a week shooting potatoes, because we did a show on potatoes. And so on that following Sunday, they asked if I wanted to do Idaho with some people. I said, well, I didn't bring the small camera. I said, well, I got a GoPro and I got my phone. So we'll just wing it. So we ended up using that small phone and GoPro. No big camera.
Have you you ever had any encounters, I know it's very rare, but have you ever seen like a wolverine or any really rare animals that are rarely seen, or like mountain goats or any of that?
Mountain goats.
Badger.
A badger?
Well, what did we see on Long Island?
Yeah, I'm just badger.
Somebody saw 2 cougars 2 weeks ago.
Woo!
Yeah.
Where was that?
Up by the Slowly River.
Oh,
Where
nice.
I showed up there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I came around the corner and 2 of them were right there.
At a safe distance.
What's that?
At a safe distance.
At a safe distance. We were in a car.
Saw a black bear swimming down the Selway River.
Saw a black bear. Wow.
We did a show a while ago in McCall. I can't recall who was doing the study, if it was the Forest Service or someone, but it was a question of, do snowmobiles impact wolverines?
Right.
And so we did see wolverines after they were trapped. And they're vicious little creatures. So,
I got to go shoot video of wolves in Yellowstone.
You did?
Yeah,
Oh.
we did a show on wolves. And it's hard to see them in Idaho, so.
They used to be in the Sawtooth.
Yeah.
They are. I saw one in the spring. Did you? Sure.
you saw a wolf in the spring.
Well, I just wanted to commend Outdoor Idaho because one of the things they're doing is educating people about the Sawtooth National Recreation Area and the good stewardship that we should have, the good conservation we should have, and what precious resources we have. Thank you, Outdoor Idaho.
This last show that Bill, you all worked on, Bill and Lauren took clips from Sawtooths on My Mind. We actually brought in this notion that there may one day be a permit system here, which just bothered me to no end to even put it in the show, but Leo, what's his name, Leo Hennessy, who used to be the state trails guy, who's retired, talked about the fact that he's been trying to get into this wilderness in Washington for years. It's a permit system, he's yet to do it. And he said that it's coming to the Sawtooths. And I just can't even imagine how that would be enforced. I mean, you've got all these different ways of getting into the Sawtooths, and I think we've gotten in every possible way, and I just go, how the hell are you going to manage that? But a friend of mine, some of you may know him, he can be quite combative, but he loves the Sawtooths. Link Jackson said that he was on a trip, a solo trip, way the heck back there, and he came back, he was talking to me, he said, I'm just heartbroken because in these places where only the quality people will go who should know better, there's garbage. He said, what's happening? I mean, it's...
He's a great artist, by the way.
Yes, he is. So it got me thinking that maybe Outdoor Idaho should be doing some more stories about, or maybe the Facebook page or Outdoor Idaho should be doing more stories on how you camp. So, because there's a lot of people, I mean, I was a perfect example. If you didn't have a fire ring, by God, you got to build one. And you got to build it big so you can build a big fire. And I've since learned that that's not cool. But if you're a teenager, you got to have the fire. You know, that's why you're out there. You got to have the fire. And
so, Bruce, what are you planning to do in your retirement?
okay, you guys close your ears. I try, when I go back to the station, I sneak in after hours when no one's there, and I get things. Jeff will occasionally see me because Jeff works the weirdest hours. He never sleeps. I don't want to interfere with when these fine folks are going to do with the show, with other things. We're going to start song.
Actually, no, I have the perfect plan for Bruce. Did you say volunteer?
Yeah, there'll be a lot of that. Bryce is right.
Well, we've been here 8 years. We became mountaineers in Washington State. And, but somebody mentioned Jackson Hole earlier, and I wanted to ask, what has kept this valley from becoming a Jackson Hole?
The SNRA.
Well, so give me a little more detail on that, because that's all kind of new.
You know who really will do this if he wants to. He's very shy. Terry and I were talking about this last night, and even this morning. I learned a few things. It is kind of complicated because part of the SNRA is private property. But Terry, take it away.
The short answer to that is Public Law 92-400. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of today, is what kept it from becoming Jackson Hole. And one of the main features of the act is it required the Forest Service to develop private land regulations to regulate the use of private lands in the valley. And it gave the Forest Service the authority to purchase scenic easements on properties that were in danger of being used in a way that wasn't compatible with the purposes of the SNRA as described in that act. And it gave the Forest Service the condemnation authority. So it's a combination of all that, working with the communities, Stanley and Smiley Creek, Lower Stanley, and the private landowners. The Forest Service does have some authority to try to make sure that the private land, including the towns, is being developed in a way that won't allow that to happen. There were subdivisions, quarter-acre subdivisions up and down the valley that were starting to be developed when the law went into place, and the Forest Service bought out most of those. So condemnation, you don't just take the land and you condemn, you have to pay the market value for that land. When you buy a scenic easement, you pay the value of all the different rights that you bought. So that's probably the most important part to answer that question of the legislation.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I always tell